Welcome back to Pace Immigration, paceimmigration.com, talking with immigration lawyer Michael O'Rourke. Michael, good to see you.
Hey, Sean, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm reading the headlines. Big news. And in fact, in the last few weeks, we just finished recording some video material about the Canadian government cracking down on student permits and raising the price for students to even come to Canada to study, doubling it up, as it were, for the permits. And now we have news today. Canada reducing the number of international student permits completely. So it's not just about raising the money or that you have to pay. It's about the fact that there's not going to be that many permits lying around. So I thought we should talk about it because it's big news online right now. We're getting lots of hits on the various posts that we've put up. Michael, let's talk about it. Too many students?
Well, yes. Potentially. It depends on how you come down on this issue because it is very political. However, in the last 10 years, our student numbers have tripled. And right now we have as many students in Canada as does the United States, which is kind of crazy to think about because we're 10 times smaller in terms of population. And we have, I think, as many or maybe not as quite as many universities and colleges here in Canada that are the equivalent to what are in California.
I know. And when I saw that number, we were talking about this off camera. I saw this a few weeks ago. I've been looking at the numbers and I was like, can that be right? And I've looked, and sure enough, international student numbers in Canada have skyrocketed. They haven't in the US, Michael, and we talked about that. Maybe we should touch on it. What's the big reason you think why it hasn't skyrocketed so much in the US as it has in Canada?
Well, a few things. One, F1 visas can be more difficult to get. That's the study permit for the United States. Two, there isn't a direct or as direct of a path into permanent residence in the US if you're a student. If you're a student in the US, you can get something called OPT at the end of your program, which means that you can work for a couple of years, depending on your field, and try to make connections with an employer. But ultimately, it's the employer who's going to sponsor your permanent residence, unlike in Canada, where if you get a postgraduate work permit, which is the equivalent of OPT, then after a year, you could qualify for Canadian Experience Class and one of the routes into permanent residence. There are also a lot of provincial programs here trying to capture students, especially those who do master's or doctoral programs, and offer them provincial nomination to permanent residence as well.
Right. That's a big thing, isn't it? We talk often about U.S. immigration, path to green card, path to permanent residency, and it doesn't necessarily apply for students, but it certainly does in Canada. We noticed Immigration Minister Miller cited high housing costs and some shady school programs as causes for concern. Maybe touch on that because he frankly called them puppy mills of diplomas.
Well, there are some schools that are less reputable than others. Not everybody goes to University of Toronto, but there are ways that they could have nipped this in the bud. For instance, a lot of schools that are private don't participate in the designated learning institution program, so their graduates don't get postgraduate work permits, for instance. They could have tightened the rules around that. To cite housing costs, that's just the political hot potato of the day. Housing costs are very high in Canada. But if you're going to have a foreign student who's already managed to come up with foreign levels of tuition for Canadian universities, which at University of Toronto, it's the only one that I know because my daughter's there. But that's like practically $50,000 a year. What's another couple 20,000 or so for an apartment if you have that kind of resources to send your kid abroad?
Right. Nonetheless, here we sit. They decided to make some cuts for political reasons and otherwise. Let's face it, mostly political reasons. But we do have student permit cuts. They've said that they're going to bring the number down by 35%. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's a lot. I don't know what to say other than this, of course, has exceptions, but the way that they're envisioning that this cut will work is that on a province by province basis, it will be based on per capita population. So, for instance, Ontario will see a huge reduction where Manitoba might not, because there are fewer population, fewer permits being issued.
Right. Man, there must be some meetings going on at universities and other facilities around Canada right now.
Yeah,
They have said 2025 limit will be reassessed at the end of 2024. Maybe we should also point out, Michael, this doesn't apply to students who have a permit now and are studying now. Is that right?
exactly. And often the permits will be issued for the length of the program. So if you're enrolled in a bachelor's degree program, then your permit is generally issued either to the duration of your passport or to the duration of the program.
There are some exemptions to this stuff. We've got here students applying to master's and PhD programs. They're off the hook.
Yes. So upper levels, master's, PhD programs are not going to be subjected to this arbitrary 35%. So to elementary and secondary school students who need a study permit will not be subjected to the arbitrary limit. It depends on the province. For instance, in Ontario, elementary and secondary school students generally don't need a study permit. In BC, for instance, they do. So luckily, those kids coming with their families or those who are coming and have a guardian in Canada, they won't experience this. It's really just aimed at your 1 and 2 year professional programs or vocational programs and your bachelor's level.
Right. We've got here as well the open work permits. This is a kind of a big deal. It's almost like burying the lead. I've been reading a lot of the news stories, and this gets kind of lost in the numbers and stuff. But this is a big deal here. Open work permits will now only be for spouses of international students enrolled in master's and doctoral, as well as professional programs like medicine and law.
Yeah, it's massive because it's expensive to live here, and two, a lot of families make the decision to come to Canada and have one spouse study because the studying spouse can work full time, and having the accompanying spouse able to work full time as well not only provides household income, but it also provides opportunities for either spouse to potentially qualify for permanent residence and make lasting connections with employers. So this is quite large, but it's also a global trend. In the UK, they've cut out the ability for spouses to work and sometimes even to accompany students to the country.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, honestly, that was the one that caught my eye the most, frankly, because they're okay. You're cutting back on some numbers, great, but this changes the whole dynamic of bringing the family over.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it does.
Okay.
And also, it's kind of in line with the U.S. The U.S. doesn't allow spouses of students to work at all.
Interesting. Yeah, you were saying, so you've mentioned the UK has kind of gone with this angle. The US already has something like that in place. So things are kind of coalescing around the same philosophy. But as you've said, and we've talked about before, students are kind of low hanging fruit, right? If you're going to make cutbacks, students are kind of the easier angle.
Yeah, they don't vote. Mom and dad are usually abroad, so they're not constituents in any provincial riding. So there are no angry calls to, well, there might be angry calls to your MPs, but they don't have the political power, unfortunately.
Right. Okay.
And I
Yes, go ahead,
honestly,
Michael.
oh, sorry. I honestly see this as just the tip of the iceberg. I think they're going to keep winnowing it down. I think they're going to reduce what students can work on their study permits if they're lucky enough to get one. I think this is just the start.
Okay, well, then we'll stay tuned and we'll talk about it. Canada reducing the number of international student permits. Questions on this or anything else with immigration, US or Canadian, or even down in Latin America and South America, Michael. Please contact Michael O'Rourke at mo'rourke@pacelawfirm.com. Thanks for this, Michael. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.